Let me tell you something most people won't say out loud. Attraction doesn't fade with age. Relevance does. A man doesn't become unforgettable because he's young, loud, or flashy. He becomes unforgettable because of how he moves, how he thinks, and how he makes people feel in his presence. The most attractive older men are not chasing attention. Attention follows them. They don't beg to be remembered. They leave an imprint. Today, we're talking about the quiet habits older men use to stay desirable, respected, and impossible to forget. Not for a moment, but for a lifetime. The most attractive thing about an older man is not his looks, his money, or his status. It's his emotional self-control. Because nothing screams insecurity louder than a man who is reactive, impulsive, or emotionally loud. A man who has lived, lost, failed, learned, and still chooses composure becomes magnetic without trying. Emotional control tells the world that this man has seen chaos and did not let chaos turn him into a weak version of himself. He doesn't raise his voice to feel powerful. He doesn't rush to prove his point. He doesn't panic when things don't go his way. And that calm, it's unforgettable. Attraction grows in the space where safety exists. When a man can regulate his emotions, people around him feel grounded. Women feel emotionally protected. Men feel respected. Conversations slow down, tension dissolves, and suddenly everyone wants to know what he knows. Emotional control doesn't mean suppressing feelings. It means mastering them. He feels anger, but he doesn't let anger speak for him. He feels disappointment, but he doesn't bleed it onto innocent people. He understands that reacting is easy, but responding is power. Older men who remain attractive understand one brutal truth. People don't remember what you say in moments of conflict. They remember how you made them feel when emotions were high. A man who stays calm when others are losing control instantly becomes the strongest presence in the room. Not because he dominates, but because he's unshaken. He doesn't compete for attention. His restraint commands it. This is why emotional discipline becomes seductive with age, because it's rare and rarity creates value. You see, masculinity pauses. The unforgettable man knows when to speak and when silence will say more. He doesn't explain himself excessively. He doesn't defend his ego. He doesn't need to win every argument to feel respected. His self-worth isn't on trial every time someone disagrees with him. That level of inner security only comes from self-awareness and experience. And experience teaches one thing very clearly: emotional chaos costs too much. What separates older men who become bitter from those who become attractive is emotional responsibility. He doesn't blame the world for his disappointments. He doesn't turn heartbreak into hostility. He doesn't punish new people for the mistakes of the past. He processes pain privately and shows up publicly with dignity. That's what makes him safe, and safety is the foundation of attraction. An emotionally controlled man listens more than he speaks. He observes before he reacts. He allows others to reveal themselves while he remains steady. This creates an aura of depth. People feel seen, heard, and understood around him. He doesn't interrupt emotions. He holds space for them. And holding space is one of the most masculine traits a man can develop because it requires strength, patience, and confidence in one's identity. The older he gets, the more selective he becomes with his emotional energy. He doesn't argue with fools. He doesn't chase people who misunderstand him. He doesn't waste time proving value to those who can't recognize it. His calm is not weakness. It's discipline. And discipline is attractive because it signals leadership. When people see a man who controls himself, they naturally trust him to lead situations, conversations, and even relationships. This habit alone makes a man unforgettable because long after looks fade and words disappear, people remember how safe, stable, and powerful they felt in his presence. The way his calm shifted the energy of the room, the way nothing about him felt rushed or desperate, the way he seemed grounded even when life tested him. The way his silence carried more authority than someone else's noise, the way his emotional discipline quietly set him apart, the way being around him felt like standing next to something solid, something certain, something that didn't need to announce itself to be felt, something that stayed steady even when everything else felt uncertain, something that lingered in the mind long after the moment passed. Something that made people realize that true attraction isn't loud, it's controlled, it's centered, it's earned. And it lives in the man who has mastered himself before trying to master anything else. The man who understands that emotional control is not about hiding feelings, but about choosing wisely which ones deserve his energy, attention, and reaction. Because a man who controls his emotions controls the narrative of his life, his relationships, and his legacy, and that is why he is never forgotten. Because presence like that leaves a mark that time cannot erase, a mark that stays, grows, and deepens with age, experience, and self-mastery, becoming more powerful with every year that passes, every challenge survived, every moment he chose calm over chaos, strength over reaction, and purpose over impulse. And that choice continues to define him in ways words never could, in ways people feel but cannot always explain, in ways that make him unforgettable, always remembered, always respected, always standing firm even when the world around him shakes, because he has already learned that real power begins inside. And once mastered, it changes everything, including how the world responds to him, how people perceive him, how attraction forms around him naturally, effortlessly, without force, without noise, without explanation, simply because his emotional control speaks louder than anything he could ever say. And that is the habit that separates ordinary aging from becoming timeless, magnetic, and impossible to forget, because men who master this habit don't age out of attraction, they grow into it slowly, steadily, and unmistakably, becoming the kind of men whose presence stays with you long after they've left the room, long after the conversation ends, long after the moment has passed, remaining etched in memory as calm strength, quiet authority, an emotional depth that never fades, never weakens, never loses its power, because it was built from within. And what is built from within cannot be taken away, cannot be replaced, cannot be ignored, and cannot be forgotten, not now, not later, not ever, because it lives beyond time, beyond age, beyond appearance, in the realm of character, control, and self-mastery, where truly unforgettable men reside, standing still while the world keeps moving, grounded while others rush, centered while others react, and composed while others lose themselves, and that composure becomes their signature, their identity, their silent promise to themselves and to the world that they are no longer ruled by emotion, but guided by wisdom, restraint, and inner strength, which is why their presence feels different, heavier, calmer, more meaningful, and why once encountered it stays with you, lingering, reminding you that real attraction isn't about trying harder, it's about becoming deeper, stronger, and more controlled, and that depth continues to unfold layer by layer, year after year, shaping a man into something rare, something memorable, something that time itself struggles to diminish, because time only sharpens what was already strong, and emotional self-control is the foundation upon which that strength is built, sustained, and quietly admired by all who cross his path, whether they realize it consciously or not, because the body responds before the mind understands, and that response is respect, attraction, and remembrance, woven together into a presence that cannot be replicated, cannot be faked, and cannot be forgotten, because it was earned through mastery, patience, and the courage to govern oneself first. And that is the habit that defines men who remain unforgettable forever, not because they demand to be remembered, but because their presence makes forgetting impossible, because it settles into memory like something familiar, solid, and enduring, something that doesn't fade when the noise disappears, something that stays grounded, composed, and powerful long after everything else has moved on. And that is the quiet strength that defines him, carries him, and keeps him unforgettable, always, endlessly, without effort, without force, without needing to say another word, because he has already said enough through who he has become, and that becoming never stops. It only deepens, refines, and continues, evolving with time, experience, and the unwavering commitment to emotional mastery, which remains his greatest advantage, his greatest attraction, and his most enduring legacy, living on in every interaction, every memory, every moment he chose control over chaos, wisdom over reaction, and self-mastery over momentary release, shaping him into a man whose presence stays long after he is gone, whose calm becomes contagious, whose strength becomes reassuring, and whose emotional discipline becomes the reason he is remembered, respected, and desired not just once, but forever. The most attractive older men understand that value is built quietly, not announced. They stop asking the world for permission to feel important and start investing in things that compound over time. This shift changes everything. When a man no longer needs constant validation, his energy becomes settled, focused, and powerful. He doesn't check who's watching before he makes a move. He doesn't measure his worth through applause, attention, or approval. He measures it through competence, consistency, and inner alignment. And that alone makes him stand out in a world addicted to external confirmation. Seeking validation is a young man's game, Building value is a mature man's discipline. Older men who remain unforgettable understand that chasing approval slowly erodes respect. The more a man tries to be liked, the less seriously he's taken. But when he builds something real, skill, wisdom, stability, character, people sense it without him saying a word. Value has weight. It changes how others respond to him, how conversations flow, how boundaries are respected. He doesn't have to demand attention because attention naturally gravitates towards substance. This man invests in mastery, not because it looks impressive, but because mastery gives him leverage in life. He becomes reliable under pressure. He knows what he brings to the table. He's not threatened by competition because he's competing with his past self, not with other people. This creates a quiet confidence that cannot be copied. He doesn't rush growth. He understands that depth takes time, and he's patient enough to let it develop. That patience is attractive because it signals long-term thinking, and long-term thinking is rare. When a man stops performing for validation, his interactions change. He listens without trying to impress. He speaks without exaggeration. He gives without expecting immediate return. His presence feels honest. There's no manipulation, no image management, no hidden agenda. People trust him because he's not trying to extract anything from them. He's already fulfilled internally. That fulfillment removes neediness, and neediness is the fastest way to kill attraction. Older men who build value instead of chasing validation understand that respect cannot be negotiated. It's earned through behavior over time. They show up consistently. They keep their word. They handle responsibilities without complaint. They don't seek praise for doing what's expected of them. That reliability creates safety. People know where they stand with him. There are no emotional spikes, no unpredictable shifts, no performative gestures designed to gain favor. Just steadiness, just substance. This man becomes selective with his energy. He doesn't invest in environments that reward attention-seeking behavior. He doesn't compete in rooms where noise is mistaken for influence. He chooses depth over visibility, and paradoxically, this is what makes him more visible. When someone doesn't need to be seen, they are seen. When someone doesn't ask to be heard, people lean in. His restraint creates intrigue. His silence suggests confidence. His focus signals self-respect. He also understands that true value extends beyond achievement. It's not just what he does, but how he carries himself while doing it. He treats people well without trying to buy loyalty. He doesn't overgive to secure attachment. He doesn't overshare to manufacture intimacy. He allows relationships to unfold naturally. This creates balanced dynamics. There's no chasing, no proving, no imbalance of power. Attraction thrives in balance, and balance is only possible when a man is not desperate to be chosen. As he ages, his identity becomes rooted in who he is, not how he's perceived. He doesn't panic when attention fades because his sense of worth doesn't depend on it. He's comfortable being underestimated. In fact, he prefers it. It gives him space to move freely, to build quietly, to surprise people later with depth they didn't anticipate. This comfort with being unseen is one of his greatest advantages, because it means he's no longer living reactively. People remember him not because he demanded attention, but because his presence felt grounded, capable, and intentional. They remember how he didn't try too hard, how he didn't sell himself, how he didn't compete for approval. They remember the way he seemed complete within himself. That completeness is magnetic. It makes people curious. It makes them want to be around him, learn from him, align with him, because humans are naturally drawn to those who appear whole. This habit reshapes how he's perceived in every area of life. In relationships, he's not trying to be chosen. He's choosing. In work, he's not chasing recognition. He's delivering results. In conversations, he's not seeking agreement. He's offering perspective. That shift changes the dynamic completely. He becomes the reference point, not the responder, the anchor, not the variable. Over time, this way of living compounds. Each year adds more depth, more clarity, more authority. He becomes someone whose opinion carries weight, whose presence signals stability, whose life reflects intention, not because he announced it, but because he lived it. And that's why men like this stay unforgettable, not through flash or force, but through quiet accumulation of value that others can feel immediately, even if they can't explain why, because value speaks a language deeper than words, and when a man embodies it fully, the world responds without being asked, without being chased, without being reminded. Simply because substance always commands attention, and a man who builds substance instead of seeking validation becomes someone people remember, respect, and gravitate toward naturally. Over time, without effort, without performance, without the need to prove anything at all, the presence of an attractive older man is calm, grounded, and unmistakably certain. Not loud, not rushed, not reactive. His energy doesn't spike when he enters a room, it settles it. People feel the shift before they consciously register why. There's no performance in how he shows up, no exaggerated confidence, no forced charm. He doesn't try to take space from others, he naturally occupies his own. And that grounded presence is what makes him unforgettable, because in a world addicted to stimulation, calm feels rare and powerful. This kind of presence comes from alignment. His words match his actions. His pace matches his priorities. He's not scattered across 100 directions, trying to be everything to everyone. He knows who he is and where he's going, and that clarity slows him down in the best way. He doesn't rush conversations. He doesn't interrupt to prove intelligence. He allows silence to exist without filling it nervously. That comfort with stillness communicates self-trust, and self-trust is deeply attractive. Grounded men move differently. Their body language is relaxed but deliberate. They don't fidget. They don't hover. They don't invade space to feel important. They stand firmly, sit comfortably, and move. Their eye contact is steady, not searching for approval, not challenging for dominance, just present, just aware, just there. And when a man is fully present, people feel seen rather than assessed, included rather than evaluated, safe rather than managed. Certainty doesn't mean arrogance. It means decisiveness without defensiveness. An unforgettable older man can make a decision without over-explaining himself. He doesn't need consensus to trust his judgment. He listens to input, considers perspectives, and then chooses. That ability to choose calmly is incredibly attractive because it signals leadership. People relax around men who know how to decide. Uncertainty creates anxiety. Certainty creates stability, and stability is something people crave more as chaos increases around them. This man doesn't rush emotional connection, and he doesn't force intimacy. His presence invites others to open up at their own pace. He doesn't probe, he doesn't push, he doesn't extract, he holds space. And holding space is a form of strength most people underestimate. It requires confidence to let someone speak without steering the narrative. It requires patience to let silence breathe. It requires emotional maturity to not take every moment personally, and that maturity makes his presence feel expansive rather than consuming. He understands that energy speaks before words do, so he regulates his energy carefully. He doesn't bring unresolved frustration into rooms. He doesn't project stress onto others. He handles his inner world privately so his outer presence remains composed. This doesn't mean he's emotionless. It means he's responsible with his emotions. People trust him because they're not bracing themselves around him. They don't feel like they need to manage his moods. They don't feel emotionally taxed after interacting with him. Instead, they feel calmer, clearer, more grounded themselves. The certainty he carries also shows up in boundaries. He doesn't overcommit to appear generous. He doesn't say yes to avoid discomfort. He's clear, polite, and firm. And because he's not constantly negotiating his boundaries, others don't try to test them. There's an unspoken understanding of where he stands. That clarity reduces friction. It creates respect. It makes interactions smoother and more meaningful. As he ages, he becomes less impressed by noise and more attuned to substance. He doesn't chase novelty for stimulation. He values depth, quality, and alignment. His conversations reflect this. He asks thoughtful questions. He listens beyond words. He responds rather than reacts. Being around him feels like a pause from the rush of the world. And people remember how they felt in that pause. They remember the sense of ease, the lack of pressure, the feeling of being able to exhale. This presence also changes how attraction forms. There's no urgency, no push, no manipulation. Attraction unfolds naturally because there's no resistance. He's not trying to convince anyone of his worth. He's simply being. And being, when grounded in certainty, is magnetic. People lean toward it without realizing why. They feel curious, they feel safe, they feel drawn in, not because he's doing something, but because he's not doing too much. The calm certainty of his presence becomes a reference point. Others start to mirror it unconsciously. Conversations slow, decisions become clearer. Tension drops. He becomes the steady element in unpredictable environments, not because he controls others, but because he controls himself, and self-control always radiates outward. People remember men like this long after the interaction ends, not because of what was said, but because of how it felt to be around them. The lack of rush, the absence of pressure, the sense that nothing needed to be proven. That kind of presence leaves an imprint. It stays in the nervous system. It becomes associated with calm, safety, and clarity. And when people encounter chaos later, their memory returns to the man who felt grounded, who felt solid, who felt certain without being rigid. This is how older men stay unforgettable, not by trying to impress, but by stabilizing the space they enter, not by dominating attention, but by anchoring energy, not by speaking the most, but by embodying certainty so fully that words become secondary. His presence becomes the message, his calm becomes the signal, his grounded nature becomes the reason people trust him, respect him, and remember him, because in a world that feels increasingly unstable, a man who remains centered becomes something rare, something valuable, something people don't forget, something that stays with them quietly, steadily, long after the moment passes, because calm certainty imprints deeper than excitement ever could. Attractive older men understand that approval is cheap and standards are costly, and that cost is exactly what makes them powerful. They stop bending themselves to be accepted and start shaping their lives around what they respect. This shift changes how everyone responds to them. A man who lives by standards rather than approval is no longer negotiable. He doesn't adjust his values to fit rooms. He chooses rooms that align with his values. And that alone sets him apart in a world where most people are constantly editing themselves to be liked. Choosing standards means being willing to disappoint people, and that's where most men fail. They confuse kindness with compliance. They confuse flexibility with lack of identity. An unforgettable man understands that you can be respectful without being agreeable and firm without being hostile. He doesn't over-explain his boundaries to soften them. He states them clearly and allows others to react however they choose. Their reaction is information, not something he needs to fix. That emotional independence is deeply attractive because it signals self-respect. This man doesn't seek approval from women, peers, or society. He seeks alignment with his principles. He knows what he tolerates and what he doesn't. He doesn't ignore red flags to avoid loneliness. He doesn't compromise core values to maintain comfort. He understands that every time he lowers his standards to be accepted, he teaches others how to treat him. So he doesn't negotiate his self-worth for temporary validation. He would rather be respected by a few than liked by many. Standards show up in how he spends his time. He doesn't entertain distractions that pull him away from his purpose. He doesn't engage in conversations that drain him. He doesn't chase relationships that require him to shrink. His calendar reflects his priorities. His actions reflect his values. And that congruence creates credibility. People trust men whose lives make sense. Even those who don't agree with him respect the clarity of where he stands. An older man with standards doesn't argue endlessly to defend them. He doesn't try to convince others that his way is right. He simply lives it. He lets his consistency do the talking. He walks away from what doesn't align without drama, without resentment, without needing the last word. That ability to disengage calmly is a form of power most people never develop. It tells the world that he doesn't need to win every interaction to remain whole. In relationships, this habit is transformative. He doesn't try to be chosen. He chooses carefully. He doesn't overinvest early to secure attachment. He observes. He allows people to reveal who they are over time. And then he decides. This removes desperation from his energy. There's no chasing, no convincing, no settling. Attraction thrives in this space because it's grounded in mutual respect rather than emotional hunger. His standards also protect his peace. He doesn't tolerate disrespect disguised as honesty. He doesn't accept inconsistency disguised as business. He doesn't excuse manipulation as misunderstanding. He recognizes patterns and responds accordingly, not with anger, but with distance. And distance, when used intentionally, is one of the most effective boundary tools there is. It teaches without lecturing. It clarifies without confrontation. As he gets older, he becomes more comfortable standing alone. Not isolated, but self-sufficient. He doesn't fear being misunderstood because he understands himself. He doesn't fear rejection because he's already rejected what doesn't align. This internal security makes his presence solid. There's no pleading energy, no silent bargaining, no hidden agenda. People feel the integrity in how he moves. They sense that he won't compromise himself to keep them, and paradoxically, that makes them value him more. Choosing standards over approval also sharpens his discernment. He becomes selective about who has access to him. Not everyone gets his time, attention, or emotional availability, and that selectivity creates value. What is easily available is rarely respected. What is earned is cherished. He understands this, so he doesn't overextend himself. He doesn't try to be everything to everyone. He focuses on being aligned with himself. This habit changes how people remember him. They remember that he didn't bend, that he didn't people please, that he didn't chase. They remember the quiet firmness in how he said no, the calm confidence in how he walked away, the self-respect in how he chose himself without apology. That memory lingers because it's rare. Most people abandon themselves to avoid discomfort. A man who doesn't becomes unforgettable. Over time, this way of living builds a reputation that speaks before he enters a room. People know where he stands. They know what he expects. They know what won't work with him. And that clarity creates ease. There's less confusion, less testing, less manipulation. Interactions become cleaner, relationships become healthier, respect becomes the baseline, not the reward. This is why older men who choose standards over approval age into attraction rather than out of it. Their value increases because their integrity compounds. Each decision reinforces the next. Each boundary strengthens the foundation. And eventually he becomes a man whose presence commands respect without force, whose choices reflect strength without aggression, whose life tells a clear story of self-respect, discernment, and alignment. And that story stays with people long after the interaction ends, because it reminds them of something most people struggle to do, which is stand firmly in who they are without needing permission, applause, or acceptance. And that quiet refusal to betray himself becomes the reason he is remembered, respected, and found deeply attractive, not because he demanded approval, but because he never needed it.